Hey there, I'm Graham, and you're listening to the Sales Nerds Live podcast. You did have a bunch of different careers. What led to some of those changes from support to RevOps to account management?
I'm so thankful that I had this team of people around me that believed in me and wanted to keep progressing my career. I don't know that I would have necessarily opted into all those things, and I think those pushes were really critical for me.
On today's episode of Sales Nerds Live, host Graham Collins welcomes Liz Christo, a partner at Stage 2 Capital. The two discuss how to learn negotiation skills to advocate for yourself, steps for building your personal brand, tips to grow your professional network, and how to seek out opportunities for growth and advancement. Let's dive in.
We're talking about Women's History Month. This is just sort of the interesting thing I was thinking about as we were describing it. Somebody who was calling me up and saying hey, I feel like I'm selling myself short, that I should be going and taking the next role, but I'm trying to start a family. And she was actually waffling through all these different thought processes. And I felt like my reassurance to her was, you always have the opportunity to do that. And if you're throwing your life through upheaval, it's okay to say I am going to take a year or two to do this thing I know how to do and go find the next thing when I feel like I'm better poised to do it.
Sales Nerds Live is brought to you by your friends at QuotaPath. QuotaPath removes the manual lift out of sales commissions by automating the compensation process. We calculate and track your team's commissions, prepare them for payouts, and even give your reps the ability to forecast attainment and future earnings. We're the only solution loved by reps, leadership, and finance. Come nerd out with us on Sales Nerds Live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I believe that we are live. Welcome to today's episode of Sales Nerds Live. As always, I'm Graham Collins, QuotaPath's Chief of Staff and resident sales nerd, and currently acting as our interim VP of Sales. Though I have been telling people I haven't put that on my LinkedIn yet because I'm not ready for the deluge of pitches from various people.
Okay, smart. Keep it off LinkedIn.
Exactly. So since 1987, March has marked Women's History Month, and this month is set aside to honor women's contributions in American history. And so for Women's History Month today, it's my pleasure to have on one of the smartest and most talented women I know, Liz Christo, who is a partner at Stage 2 Capital, to share her career journey from support specialist to investor and advisor. Welcome, Liz. Great to have you.
Thank you. I got to tell you, I haven't done one of these before, and it's a little disconcerting to be live but not be able to see the other folks. I'm used to the Zoom meeting where you see people.
I know. It is strange. And I always look back afterwards and there are a bunch of comments and questions and stuff. And I'm oh shoot, I should probably have that up, but I can't focus on that many things at once.
Can't do all those things.
Apologies if folks have questions. Please feel free to follow up with us afterwards if you have additional questions. But we have Liz on here. Liz, I'd love to hear a little bit about your career and your career trajectory. Like I said, you started as a support specialist and have moved into the VC world. So can you just give me a quick overview of your career?
The 30,000 foot view. Yes. So I, coming out of college, was trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. And I ended up joining a really small startup in Boston as a support specialist, which was basically the only entry-level role they had. And when I joined, we were actually pretty promptly acquired by a large public company, NetSuite, although I guess it wasn't really large at the time. I think I joined a 40-person company and got acquired by a 400-person company. And it was kind of funny because I think early on I had this moment of I really want to work at a big company, so intentionally chose a startup for the experience. And then I ended up staying there for the better part of a decade. I was about 8 years, which, looking back were some of my fondest memories, a lot of really interesting stuff I got to work on there. The path for me, support was where I started. I got to know in-depth product. I was on the phone for many hours every day. And I think that was sort of the first foray I had into sales, even though it wasn't sales, but I talk about that first job on the phone as being learning how to communicate, getting a lot of customer facing experience. And then over time, things shifted. I moved into sales operations. I went from there into account management. And we can certainly talk more about the shifts and why those happened. But my 1 year anniversary I ended up shifting into a leadership role inside sales, building out this EDR and global lead gen function. And then over time, kind of brought on some other things under my purview there, recruiting, a solution consulting group. And at the end of 2015, I kind of had this realization of wow, I work at a really big public company now, and it was kind of not my intent. And I got amazing amazing experience, but I didn't feel like I was learning. And I went out to try to figure out what I could go do next, and where could I step function my learning and do the next thing, and that became venture. Joined OpenView Venture Partners, spent about 6 years there, and we can dig into that path and journey. But that was first on the operating side, and then moving over to the investing side, and then at Stage 2 Capital, where I am now. I'm a partner. We work in a pod model. I invest in B2B software companies. QuotaPath being one of them. And it has been a wild ride. I kind of laugh about this as I reflect on it. I ran a BDR team at a software, a very large one, a couple hundred people. And I think about what my job is today in VC, and I am a BDR. I source, I find companies, I reach out cold. I try to get a CEO on the phone to talk to me. And then my job is qualification. And the weird part is at the end of that, instead of I guess they are buying, but basically they're buying my check and I get to write a check at the end of it. But it's the same enterprise sales process, just a slightly different take on it.
Yeah.
So that's a quick version.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And a few things you mentioned, I'm going to dig into throughout the time. One that really stood out to me is the component about learning and feeling like you weren't learning anything. And I've been in that situation, and every time I've made a career jump, that has been the major driving force behind it, is like, I'm not learning anything new. I'm just going through the motions, or like, I feel like I've hit my, 10,000 hours or whatever, if you that whole concept. And I don't feel like I'm learning anything else. So, interesting to hear you say that as well. I will say one thing on that, though, because I feel like I push people on that, and that has also been my career journey. But I also think there are really good reasons to stay in a role where you have mastery, and there are different inflection points in our own lives that make that actually the comfort of knowing that is a good thing to have for periods of time. So I think while I will lean into this, I was pushing myself to go learn something new and do something new and challenge myself, I also think there are really good for somebody to be like, hey, I've got complete mastery in my role. I know how to control the time investment right now. That's what I want for this next 2 years. So I don't want that to be all end all. There's a lot of reasons to stick with something, Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. And that is a learning in and of itself. Being in a role for a period are very good. You're learning what it's like to be in a role where you're very good. I tend to, as you know, bounce around roles, stay with companies, but bounce around roles. Our sales team now, I ran our marketing team historically, and RevOps and finance and all kinds of stuff. So
I got a call from a woman for talking about Women's History Month. This is just sort of the interesting thing I was thinking about as somebody who was calling me up and saying, I feel like I'm telling myself like I should be going and taking the next role, but I'm trying to start a family. And she was waffling through all these different thoughts, and I felt like my reassurance to her was, you always have the opportunity to do that. And if you're throwing your life through upheaval, it's okay to say I am going to take a year or two to do this thing I know how to do and go find the next thing when I feel like I'm better poised to do it. And I don't know, I felt like what I heard from her was this pressure to go find the next thing and challenge herself and drive for it. And there's plenty of people who want to do that, but it's also okay to give yourself a break and be I'm happy where I am for the moment. And there are many other things I could be optimizing for. So I don't know, we'll just share that story that I do think it's not everyone's optimizing for the same things at the same time.
For sure. And I encounter this a lot when I talk to salespeople, where in the sales world, it feels like everybody you talk to, okay, what are your long-term goals? What is your long-term vision is to move into a leadership role? And
when can I become a manager?
Yeah, I want to manage a team or eventually become a director or VP. And that's not for everyone. I like managing people. I like leading people because I get more satisfaction out of other people succeeding than myself. And that's okay, but it means that I've made less money than a lot of the people that I manage.
Exactly.
Sales, a lot of times money is the motivating factor, and it is okay to be in a individual contributor role and be a top performer. Like there's a lot of satisfaction in there. A lot of people who don't realize and are like, well, I have to move into a management role, fail at it or miserable, and then feel like they have to tuck their tail between their legs and go back to an IC role as if it's like a step. And that's really not the case. And similar to what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you had said that you did have a bunch of different careers. Similarly, like I said, I tend to bounce around different roles within an organization. What led to some of those changes from support to RevOps, account management?
Yeah, at NetSuite, I would say there were two themes there. I think the first was I had a leadership group around me who very much invested in me, believed in my capabilities, and were like game to let me just try. Like, looking back, like it's sort of interesting to think about that, but I think they were like, look, you'll like put your all into something and you're probably going to get it to like 80-90%, and we can like massage the edges, and you just have the energy to run out these new things. So like go.
Yeah.
So that was one of them. And I think the other was just, I was good at the 0 to 60, like get something off the ground, and often without the actual like control aspect, like had influence, had relationships, was friendly with a lot of people, which led to, I think, my ability to kind of get things going and rally a lot of people to start a new hard thing. And so like the themes between those, from product, like support specialist, to sales ops, to account management, to inside sales, a lot of belief, a lot of people coming to me and saying, hey, we want you to do this thing. And then there was an example of one of them. I think the account management to BDR move was an interesting one, where I was putting my hand up saying, like, I do want to like figure out how to like expand what I'm working on. But in my head, I was like, I have this team I love. I really want to work on it. And I want to do this new thing. And I remember the talk with my boss and CEO, who was like, Liz, like, these are two big jobs. You can't do both. So like pick. And at that point, I had picked to stay with my team. And then that decision got made for me of like, nah, you like made a pretty good case. Go do the new one. So I don't know. It's a mix of me putting my hand up, and I think, you know, people kind of giving you some opportunities. But I'm so thankful that I had this team of people around me that believed in me and like wanted to keep progressing my career. I don't know that I would have like necessarily opted into all those things. And I think those pushes were really critical for me.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing that I remember I was asked early on in my career through an acquisition. But I was working as an individual contributor in sales. I'll tell you, I'm never going to be the number one seller on the floor. Generally, I'm good at sales, but I'm much better at leadership. And there was a gentleman whose name is Apollo Atika, and who was an incredible product leader, and he and I had a conversation at one point because I was getting kind of burnt out in sales, and I was like, look, I'm looking for something new. I'd like to go to the product org. He was pretty honest with me, and he was like, candidly, Graham, like, you got to be good at your job if you want to move to somewhere else. Like, you can't just be like, I'm bored, I'm not very good at this, let me move to somewhere else. Like, I'm not going to want to hire you to a different organization if you're kind of half-assing it and being mediocre at your job. And it sounds like that's one of the which leads me to my question that I'm kind of leading the witness here, but like, how were you able to move into those new roles?
I can kind of take them one by one. I think starting with the sales ops to account management one, I'll tell the full story because it's kind of a weird one. But look, I had been in sales operations for a year and a half or so, and I was working on the subsidiary where I had to do all of the things. And so I was lead routing, I was SKU management, I was order management, I was closing the month, like all the like many things that fall under a revenue operations function, reporting, offsites, everything. And I think one of the things that really like got into my head was I was signing off on these commission checks for people making so much money at the time. And I'm sitting there being like, wait, like I'm like doing a lot of this work. I'm like helping these things get through the process. I'm running our forecast calls. I'm in every deal. I used to jump on the phone like late at night with our team in Australia and help like negotiate legal contracts because I was like the only person willing to do it at midnight. And I had this moment of just like, man, like, am I selling myself short? And so I remember putting my hand up and saying like, I want to move into sales. And it's funny, my leader at the time came back to me and was like, hey, like, how about management? Like all the things you like doing and are good at, like you should move into sales management. So he literally took a bet on me as I've never sold anything and I never managed anyone and was like, yeah, like try running that team. And it was a really odd moment because I went from a group of people that I had known for a long time to being sort of like their peer and support person to their manager. And that transition was not easy. And I give all of them a ton of credit in retrospect of just like what an odd thing that probably was for them. But I think the thing that really worked there is like I was an expert in the things that I knew. And I could add a lot of value to their sales processes, both through like internal functions, through influence of how to get to other people, through like the actual product knowledge and helping them like with their customer conversations. And then I was like willing to learn everything else. And I was never shy and I asked a lot of questions. And we actually ended the year as the top performing team in the company. And I remember getting a call and being like, hey, you hired a lot of people that weren't salespeople. Like, how did you do this? And the answer to me was like so simple. It was like, well, we like taught them the product. And at the time, like no one else who was selling knew the product. They were relying on sales engineers and pulling other people in. And I think that to me was like this critical awareness moment for me of like figuring out what I don't know, it's probably not a hack, but like what are the most important things that are going to like level you up in whatever the role is. And, you know, that was one of them. There were a bunch of other things we did with that team, but a lot of it came back to like systems and process and actually like just creating continuity between how people were doing things and learning from each other. And our team meetings became this just like war room of like, let's figure out how to do the thing instead of a lot of like one-on-ones and me trying to kind of move between folks. I actually don't know if that answered your question, Graham. That was kind of
no, that's good. No,
but,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
And the thing that I found fascinating there as well is like hiring folks who don't come from a sales background. And I hired a lot of SDRs at in my previous role. I ran an SDR team as well, not nearly as large as Liz's. Mine was about 40 people. But hiring a lot of folks there, I found a lot of success hiring former teachers. I found a lot of success hiring people who came from like wait staff,
service industry, a great one. Yeah.
And my number one thing that I wanted out of those people was curiosity. And how curious are you? Like, what is your, and so during interviews, I would ask people, just teach me something I don't know. And the people who were the best were people who like just dove in and started asking me questions about like, okay, well, what do you know? It's like, okay,
right.
Right. And then them like teaching me something that they knew a lot about that they assumed that I didn't know a lot about because they were curious and they learned things. They learned things not necessarily just because they had to for their job, but they learned things that were because they were curious folks.
Yeah. And then like that learning thread, man, we just keep coming back to that. But I think that's the other career like transition point that I would share with you is when I decided to wrap up my time at NetSuite, I think one of the things I kept thinking about was how do I go learn something new? And I had spent the bulk of my career in like one organization with a great and impressive set of people. It was a rocket ship, but like I didn't even really choose it. I got acquired into it. And so I kept thinking about like, what's the next step? And I was getting recruited really hard to go run another inside sales team at a large company because there were very few people at the time who had run outbound with like hundreds of people. Like that was just, it was still kind of new. Like we didn't have a ton of technology to do it. It's not today. And I felt like, hey, I could go do that and I would like become a master at this thing. But I felt like I was going to go down a path of like getting stuck in that. And I wasn't ready to do it again. And so venture for me was this opportunity to go learn from like hundreds of experts. I don't know, maybe thousands. Like I had exposure to thousands of like amazing, creative, successful people who were, I don't know, like all in and trying to like do something cool and new. And then, got to spend significant time with hundreds and got to go really deep with, tens. And that to me was this like compelling moment where I felt like I could step function my learning and surround myself with people who are experts in other things and start to like learn the pattern matching between them. So my jump to VC was all about that. It was like pretty selfishly my own learnings that I wanted to go advance. And then, since then obviously has kind of become much more of a passion in a different way. But the early step for me was just learning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And that actually was my next question, which is what inspired that move. Okay, we've talked about the internal stuff, but then VC is a totally different world. And what inspired it. So that's interesting. And I guess I say VC is a totally different world. Never having worked in VC, having worked with a lot of investors and worked with a lot of boards and VC folks in VC, I feel like I've been exposed to it some, but is it truly as different as everybody says it is? I mean, earlier you were saying that you're essentially
yes and no.
But so I don't know how different it truly is.
The process of the like finding companies and trying to like sell yourself to them, I feel like is actually very similar to a sales process. And even like how we think about like planning and winning, like we build account plans, like we have win plans. We're thinking about what are the things we need to do to build this relationship, to build trust, who are the influencers. Like it's very similar. I think where it becomes really different is like not on the sourcing side and the day-to-day role of like actually working with a portfolio of companies. There's a couple things that I guess stand out to me that are different. One, you don't like have a core team. Like you are part of a lot of other people's teams and in very different capacities, and figuring out like what your role should be with them. It's not the same. It's not cookie cutter company to company. And it really depends on the relationships you've built and developed in those companies. Sometimes it's just with the CEO. Sometimes it's with many people in the org. Sometimes you're on a like daily text cadence. Sometimes you're at like a quarterly board meeting. And so I think figuring out like the rhythm of your work and where to spend time is really important. And sometimes that's influenced by the company, and sometimes that's influenced by kind of where you're trying to spend time and where you think you can like move the needle. And then that's the second piece is like ultimately the feedback loops on this job are really long. So you're making an investment and you're betting that you're right, but like you won't know for a long time. Like our investment horizon is like, let's call it 7 to 10 years. And so you're making these decisions along the way. And yes, companies get marked up. You can see if someone's struggling. There are lots of like signals and indicators, but it's a long time to realize what the actual outcome is. That was probably the hardest change for me as someone who had a quota for over a decade. And like every month you just like knew if you did it or not. This is like very different. And then, yeah, I think like obviously you have a team internally, but it's not where you spend the bulk of your time. You're with the companies, and that, I don't know, it's a very different working model. For some, I think it's really, really fun. Like I love getting to plug in and work on different and unique things. And like I said, learn something new.
Yeah, that's great. There's that old adage about like every musician wants to be a comedian or an actor, and every actor wants to be a musician. And it feels like a lot of times that's the case for VC and operator is like, doctors like, oh, I want to be in the VC world. And then a lot of people who I talk to in VC are like, oh boy, it's kind of nice having a monthly quota, like knowing if I'm doing a good job or not.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people reach out to me of like how I made the like jump and transition. And like usually the word I get is like, yeah, I really want to work on strategy. And I'm like, oh man, like that's part of it and like the longer term thinking, but so much of the day to day is not. It's like really tactical things of thinking about like how do we move the needle and move faster in just one of these areas, and like figuring out how to inject your ideas, but not like know and be aware you are not in the operating seat here. Like you ultimately are, of course, deferring to and relying on the judgment of this leadership team. And all you can do is kind of like, I don't know. I always think of it as like holding up a mirror. Actually, I think AJ described that once of like, hold up a mirror, reflect what you can back, share if things are working or not, what your observations are, and like help where you can. But yeah, the concept of like VC is just like this, pie in the sky strategy thing is not a good analogy.
Yeah, that's what I'm learning. I've learned that over time. Well, so you've talked a lot about surrounding yourself with really smart people and learning as much as you can from them. In the VC world, it sounds like you were able to do that really easily. However, not everybody is in that. And so what advice would you give to folks who are looking to build their professional network and surround themselves with people from whom they can learn?
Yeah, it's funny. I've thought about this a lot, and I think when I was reflecting on like my early network and who those people were, I think there is like this insular network of people that you work with and figuring out first, like who your allies are, who you bounce ideas off of, who are the people that you can like have really honest conversations with and who will challenge you. And it's funny, that group from like my first job has been like, everybody's gone on to do different things and build different experience, but I feel like we still do that for each other. So I have this just awareness that I was probably very lucky to like have a really tight knit group in that first company. But the second thing is I think looking for like affinity groups, like what are you trying to learn or where are you trying to up level yourself and figuring out where they are. I was actually part of like this group of female sales leaders that used to get together, I don't know, maybe once every other month in Boston. Small group, all in Boston. There weren't many of us then. And that group has just been like amazing to come back to time and time again. Similarly, like I felt like I found this group through the AAISP, American Association of Inside Sales Professionals, when I was first like learning and like trying to figure out what this like lead gen program should look like for NetSuite. I went to a conference, I met a bunch of people, and then I don't know, I like reached out to them and asked for their time. And one of the things I took out of that was try to give more than you take. Like make sure you're actually doing something for the other person too, not just constantly like asking for favors and then stuff comes back to you. And then the other thing that I would just give as advice to everybody is making sure you follow through. And I feel like so much of networking is like this great conversation that happens in person or on the phone. And then either you offer something and don't do it, you commit to an action and don't do it. And then like it kind of just trails off. And the continuity and like the continuous engagement, I think is what matters the most for building a relationship. So if you say you're going to do something, like do it. If someone asks for help and you say yes, like follow through on that. It's okay to ask for favors, follow up and make sure they actually like you take them up on it, that you close the loop when it's done, that you like thank them for whatever they've done for you. Look, it's like hard, it takes time, but I think there is this like aspect of what you put in, you will get out, and you do have to commit meaningful time to it. I don't know if you have a different take because you've like obviously built a very large network too. But those are some of the things that I feel like I do on repeat.
Yeah, the thing that really stood out to me that I try to be good about is the follow through. And a lot of time the follow through is telling somebody you still haven't done something and you plan on doing it. Because like I've struggled with ADHD my entire life. And in high school and college, I had to create these coping mechanisms of like setting sets of reminders for myself. And so like I use the Slack/remind me function all the time. The fact that you can mark emails unread, now you can mark texts unread has been a game changer for me.
Wait, I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. It's amazing. Like I have 6 unread text messages right now.
Can you do it in LinkedIn?
But what's that?
Can you do it in LinkedIn?
Yeah. Oh, you can mark messages unread in LinkedIn as well. And so like I read it, I process it, and I mark it unread if I need to do that. And so it's setting up that list of to-dos essentially. I also use a productivity journal where I like create lists of goals, daily lists of goals. Today, most important task of the day is Sales Nerds Live. So here we are doing it.
Check one.
Put that off here very shortly. And so, but so much of networking is follow through, and saying you're going to do something is fine, but actually doing it is, and that's actually something I'm very, have always been very impressed with you doing is like, Liz and I met up for breakfast a couple of weeks back, and like a couple of days before, she sent me a text message saying like, "Hey, are we still on for breakfast? This location, whatnot." And so having that good follow through and that good follow up is incredibly important for building those relationships.
So one other thing on the follow through that I personally haven't solved, I don't have a very good memory. I'm just going to like go on record. And so like one of the tools I've set up for myself is like tracking who I actually meet with and like what we talked about. Because what I find is like 2 months later, somebody will like comment and be like, "I'm looking for an advisor to do X," or "I like want to meet somebody that does Y." And like you rack your brain and you're like, "Who is that person I talked to?" Like, and having that like log for me allows me to go back and then like make connections later. And I do think that act of connecting others is a really good give. And I think a lot of times I get asked for my time. And if I can get somebody else to like plug in there, it's actually like way more beneficial to two parties and continues to build that network.
Yeah, that's great. I first off, I'll make a plug for a tool that I use, which is called Connect the Dots. I think it's ctd.ai. I use this tool.
Okay.
It's super cool. It like goes through your email, your personal email, your work email, your LinkedIn, all of this stuff, and it actually like shows you how strong of a relationship you have with somebody. You can access it from your LinkedIn page or from somebody's LinkedIn. You click it, it shows like all of your email exchanges, all of the stuff. So it's very helpful.
I wrote it down.
Good, great. It's a cool tool. I met the guy who's founder at SaaStr a couple of years ago, and I've been using it ever since.
Love that.
Do you have a tool for like a personal CRM? I know that sounds silly, but I've been on this hunt.
I've tried a bunch, and I don't have one that I continuously use.
Me either. And I'm like,
yeah,
this is what a Rolodex is.
It's my phone contacts.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That makes sense. Awesome. Well, so we are coming up on a half hour here, Liz. I want to be respectful of your time. I have 3 questions that I ask everybody at the end of Sales Nerds Live. Same 3 questions. Well, not exactly the same 3. They get slightly modified over time. But the first one is, what piece of advice would you give yourself on your first day of your career? If you could go back in time.
Take care of yourself first. When I look back, I think I lost myself for a period of years. I put work first. I was working 17 and 18-hour days. I was traveling every weekend to get to where I needed to be for the next city. And I think I've done a regrouping of taking care of my physical health, my mental health, my energy. I actually manage my day now based on how I know I feel at different points. I have time blocks when I know that I can do better deep thinking in the morning. I say no to calls that are too late at night most of the time. But I think this concept of just learn what works for you and then be a stickler for it. You can make exceptions, but you are in charge of your own time, and it's precious and you don't have a lot of it. So protect the time you need first, because you'll show up way better for whatever work you're doing. Yeah,
that's great. Number 2, if you weren't doing what you currently do, what would you be doing? This question was originally if you weren't in sales, because we had started talking to sales leaders now. So I've gotten quite a few different answers here, and most of them are a little bit more fun, but I'd love to hear what your answer is. I'm curious if I know what it is. It's
it's going back to the service industry. If I think about the part of it's so bad to say because I have such a fun and interesting work life, but man, I love being a bartender. I love managing restaurants. I would totally go back and do something in food service, and there's a lot of different iterations that could take, but some version of a coffee shop and morning spot.
Nice. That's great. My wife and I are both really into craft beer, and she's worked at a couple of different breweries and different beer bars, and people are always like, "Oh, would you guys want to open a brewery?" And I'm like,
I see a brew and brew coming.
No, absolutely not. I would not have any interest in owning a brewery. I'd love to work at a brewery. I'd love to do that, but I'll have somebody else do all of the hard stuff, and I'll do the pouring beer. That's so. If you're hiring, let me know. I'll
okay. Come. Updates to come.
And then finally, what are you watching, reading, and or listening to right now? Work related, not work related. I put
not work related
because I don't really read very much. I mostly just listen to podcasts. So
all right. So I am an avid reader, multiple books per week, but it's junk criminal fiction. So I'm not going to share that.
Okay.
So I'm taking the other direction. I'm watching Shrinking on Apple TV. Have you watched it yet?
No.
Harrison Ford, Jason Segel, hysterical, timely, relevant. Harrison Ford as an 80-year-old dude is unbelievable. You have to go watch it.
Okay. All right. I just wrote it down.
Shrinking. Yeah.
I love it. That's great. Awesome. Liz, really appreciate your time. Any plugs here at the end for anything you're working on or anything you want people to check out?
No big plugs. I think, I'm always interested in connecting with new folks and appreciate you having me on and chatting with me. This was really fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. And for on our side, plugs as always, QuotaPath. We actually just recently, about a month ago, launched a free trial component of our platform. So if you are interested in checking out QuotaPath, commission tracking, free trial, get your team set up, integrate your CRM, calculate commissions, calculate quota attainment, especially with Q1 coming to a close here. I'm sure a lot of folks are dreading the commission tracking process. Let's make it easier for you with a free trial.
Love it.
that's all I have. Liz, really appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Liz. Bye.